Is it a good idea to blend genres within a single game? Naturally, most people would say yes. Combining two seemingly unrelated concepts can add a lot of gameplay variety, immersion, and mechanical depth. Developers are constantly experimenting with genre fusion in an effort to create something that feels new and distinct. But when you take two completely different styles of play and put them together, one critical question has to sit at the center of that design. How do these two halves actually work together? How does interacting with one side of the game change how you engage with the other? Are they meaningfully intertwined or just two separate experiences sharing the same package? In the case of Cult of the Lamb, you have two very clear pillars. A pretty standard action roguelite, and a base building farming sim. Two genres that I absolutely love, by the way, but the real question is whether Cult of the Lamb successfully blends these ideas into one cohesive experience, or if it ends up feeling like two different games fighting for your attention. Well, let's find out. The story begins with you playing as a lamb being sacrificed to the bishops of the Old Faith. After your premature death, you encounter a demon-like entity known as the One Who Waits. He promises you resurrection if, in return, you build a cult to eliminate the 4 bishops and free him from his eternal imprisonment. So begins your journey of recruiting followers, building faith among them, and establishing a base of operations, all while going on crusades to eradicate the enemies of the One Who Waits. When it comes to gameplay, I first want to discuss the two core components of the game in isolation, and then talk about how they work in tandem with one another. When it comes to the roguelite side of the game, there honestly isn't a whole lot to say. It's pretty good, but also pretty basic. The action and build crafting are fairly minimal, offering little variety or depth, but regardless, it manages to stay enjoyable throughout. You'll begin a run by being given a random weapon and spell, then continue through winding arena-style rooms, fighting enemies, collecting resources, and obtaining upgrades. Combat itself is pretty enjoyable. It's fast and responsive, with a wide variety of enemies all throwing different attacks at you. You need to stay focused, read the room, and constantly stay on the move or you will quickly be taken down. The real downside to this experience is just how little there is in terms of build crafting. As I mentioned before, when you enter a run, you are given a random weapon and spell. There is no choice here, so if you are given a weapon you don't like, you're stuck with it until you find a new one, which isn't super common. You can circumvent this issue by spending gold, but it's pretty expensive to do so, and gold is usually much better spent elsewhere. The most common form of upgrades come from tarot cards, and while their bonuses are certainly beneficial, they don't provide much diversity or depth. Your options are limited when choosing between cards, and the vast majority of their bonuses are simply just stat boosts like increased damage, health, or attack speed. There are a few micro decisions to be made. For example, if I have a weapon that applies poison when I attack, I probably don't want a tarot card that also applies poison on my attacks. But that's really the extent of any build crafting or strategic decision making on the roguelite side of the game. Outside of that, it mostly just comes down to speed, reaction time, and focus. The base building farming sim side of the game, on the other hand, clearly received the vast majority of attention during development. This side of the game is deep, unique, and genuinely engaging. Basically, you will recruit followers from a variety of sources into your cult. These followers can then perform actions for you like growing crops, gathering resources, building structures, and so on. The trick here is that your followers actually need to be taken care of. They will starve, get sick, lose faith in the cult, kill one another, steal from you, break things around the base. They can really become a problem if they're not managed properly. You'll spend a lot of time doing basic chores like watering plants, cleaning up poop, chopping down trees, the usual stuff, but as you advance through the tech tree, you'll start unlocking buildings that automate these processes, and this allows for better means of production and keeps the cult happy and healthy. So the challenge becomes figuring out how to expand your cult while dealing with all the problems associated with the growing population. Do I have enough food? Are there proper living quarters? Can I treat the sick? Can I manage dissenters before they turn my whole cult against me? How can I lessen my workload to give me more time to deal with more pressing matters? It's an engaging problem with a lot of interesting solutions, largely thanks to the game's central theme. At the end of the day, this is your cult, and you dictate all of the rules. Sure, some followers might frown on certain actions, but you're the dictator here. Is that follower giving you problems? Just sacrifice him. Is that follower dissenting? Force feed him the corpse of the last dissenting follower and he'll probably change his mind. There's this sick, twisted methodology in ensuring that followers do what you need them to do, but it's wrapped up in this cutesy cartoon animal aesthetic that somehow manages to be both disturbing and charming at the same time. But the notion that the cult is entirely under your control seeps into almost every aspect of the farming sim experience, largely thanks to the doctrine system. Throughout your crusades, you can come across shards of a stone slab. Once you collect enough of them, you can declare a new doctrine. These provide rituals, passive bonuses, and allow for more commands for your followers. I took a fairly basic approach, declaring doctrines that mainly helped me keep my cult happy and healthy. But there were some wild ones that could shift the cult to be more cannibalistic, which could be kind of interesting if you really want to go that route. The only downside is that you can't change your doctrine choices at any point before you beat the game. This was a bit annoying because there were a few doctrines that I thought would be good that never really worked out the way I expected, while others became much less useful once my cult became more self-sufficient later in the game. The option to alter those choices would have been a nice addition, but it's only a minor complaint. And all things considered, it is genuinely fun expanding and decorating your cult, especially when things are going really bad. People are dying, and you're scrambling to get everything back in order. So back to the real question, how do these two completely different systems interact? Because if this game is supposed to be about blending genres, this is the point where everything either works or completely falls apart. And unfortunately, this is where Cult of the Lamb starts to struggle. It is true that you need to go on crusades to obtain resources and followers that are then used to upgrade your base. It's also true that ensuring your followers are healthy, happy, and of high level can boost your power during crusades. But the interactions between these two systems is mostly surface level, and in some cases, it doesn't even feel particularly meaningful. When you go on a crusade, you'll collect money, resources, and food, then bring these back to your base to build new structures and expand your cult. The issue is that this really only matters in the early game when you have nothing. Once your cult becomes established, the majority of necessary resources can simply be produced within your base. There are a handful of materials that can only be found during crusades, but they are used far less often and are often only required for decorations. Toward the end of the game, I often found myself just waiting for my followers to produce the materials I needed rather than going out on a crusade to find them. As for becoming stronger for crusades themselves, this is probably my biggest criticism of the game. Out of everything you build at your base, all the structures, automation, and followers you level up, there are really only two systems that actually make you stronger in combat outside of the numerous temporary buffs you obtain during a crusade. The first and most important is giving sermons. You can give one sermon per day, and doing so awards experience based on the number and level of your followers. When you level up, you unlock a new permanent perk. Naturally, you might think the loop here is to expand your cult in order to gain more experience, but days in this game are extremely short and the amount of experience required to level up is fairly small. Because of this, you don't actually need that many followers to maintain a steady stream of XP. So while having a thriving cult technically helps you level up faster, it never feels particularly necessary. A lot of the effort you put into expanding and maintaining your cult ends up feeling somewhat disconnected from your actual power during crusades. And as a side note, once you max out your skill tree, sermons begin rewarding an extra temporary heart for your next run. Considering that on the hardest difficulty you only start with 2 hearts, and the fact that days are very short, it becomes incredibly easy to stack multiple extra hearts before a crusade. You can increase your health by something like 500% before a run, which is honestly pretty ridiculous and borderline game breaking. The second way to gain power is by turning followers into demons that fight alongside you during crusades. This is probably the most interesting interaction between the base building and roguelite systems because each follower provides different benefits and those benefits improve based on the follower's level. Creating a small army of demons is both fun and genuinely helpful. Unfortunately, this mechanic doesn't become meaningfully available until fairly late in the game. You cap out at only 3 demons, and the summoning circle is basically one of 2 structures out of nearly 100 that actually impacts your performance during crusades. I guess the point I'm trying to get across is that when you have a base building system directly tied to your power in a roguelite run, I expect a clear gameplay loop. Something like going out to find a specific resource, bringing it back to your cult, using a building or a follower ability to turn it into something new, and then using that to unlock upgrades that make your next crusade easier. That kind of back and forth between the 2 systems is what gives these hybrid games their depth. But that isn't really what happens here. Instead, most of the time it feels less like I'm developing a base of operations and more like I'm just running a farming sim where my power slowly increases based on how much time I spend managing followers. So rather than actively working towards new upgrades, I often found myself just role-playing as a cult leader and killing time until I felt strong enough to take on the next challenge. And this really bothered me because I kept thinking about what my goal is. The game clearly lays it out for you. Defeat all the bosses at the end of each dungeon. And despite taking up the vast majority of my overall playtime, building a base and taking care of your cult doesn't really feel that impactful in regards of achieving that goal. I suppose you do need a specific number of followers just to enter a dungeon, but that can sometimes just feel more like gatekeeping rather than any deep connection. It would be like if in Minecraft before I entered the Nether I needed a 10x6 porch on my house. A bit of an exaggeration, but you get what I mean. These elements feel so disconnected from one another that it comes off as a chore. So after spending a good amount of time with Cult of the Lamb, I think it ultimately lands somewhere in the middle. The roguelike side of the game is fun, but fairly basic. The combat feels good, and the moment-to-moment action is enjoyable, but there just isn't a lot of depth there when it comes to build crafting or long-term strategy. On the other hand, the cult management side of the game is genuinely engaging. Expanding your base, managing your followers, and solving all the problems that comes with running a cult creates a surprisingly compelling gameplay loop. And the game's strange mix of adorable animals and disturbing rituals gives the entire experience a really unique personality. The real issue is that these 2 systems never quite come together in a meaningful way. You do go on crusades to gather resources for your cult, and your cult does make you stronger during those crusades, but those connections remain fairly shallow. Most of the time it feels less like a single cohesive system and more like 2 separate gameplay loops that occasionally intersect. And that's a little disappointing, because the idea behind Cult of the Lamb is genuinely great. A roguelike where dungeon runs directly fuel the growth and management of your cult has the potential to be something really special. Instead, what we get is a game where both halves are good, but neither one quite reaches the depth it probably could have if they were more tightly connected. But even with those shortcomings, Cult of the Lamb is still a fun experience. The gameplay is enjoyable, the theme is memorable, and the twisted little world the developers created has a lot of personality. It may not fully realize the potential of the genre-blending idea, but the strange mix of cult management and roguelike combat still manages to create something that's a genuine good time. Thank you everybody for watching. If you liked what you saw, be sure to like and subscribe to support the channel. And until next time, cheers!